We shift our focus now to Waterkloof first, where we believe more is taking place, and we're of course joined by SABC International News Editor Sophie Mokoena to just take us through what exactly we're seeing on our screens this very moment.
Well, as you know that when it arrived, it went into one of the hangars. In the hangar, they were preparing the remains, putting them in coffins, and also draping the coffin with the South African flag. And from here, we expect these coffins to be taken to a 1 mil hospital, which is a military hospital. And the process is not yet complete because they will still have to look at the DNA of families and the tissues of what they got underground. Because some of them, when you take for an example, Duma Nokwe, it was more than 40 years. And therefore, the remains might not be in a state that where you can be able to quickly process that, even though some process was started when they were outside the country. But even here, you have to make sure that as you give the families these remains, the families who are taking these remains are really the people who are supposed to do that. And from tomorrow, then it will be a preparations for Friday, where there will be a special ceremony at Freedom Park. Why Freedom Park? Freedom Park because many of some of the names of those who died in exile, the activists from different political parties, their names, there's a plaque where you have the names of all those who died during the struggle, some of them in the country. And therefore it is almost like a shrine, Freedom Park. It is also part of what we call the Frontline State Memorial Route. In other words, how the struggle happened in the southern region with the support of countries like Tanzania, Mozambique, Angola, Zambia, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Lesotho, Botswana. And this is where that kind of a history is kept. That is why sometimes you will see ambassadors of those frontline states having functions there at the Freedom Park Square. That would include your Cuba, your Russia, when they fought side by side with Africans during the Battle of Quito Carnival. And as the member of the ANC International Relations Committee, Obed Babela, pointed out, you have countries such as Angola. And earlier on, there was information that the repatriation will involve 49 people. But the statement from the presidency, where they are indicating that the president will preside over that ceremony on Friday, is indicating that it is only 42. We know that in relation to Zimbabwe, some of the people were not repatriated, or the remains were not repatriated because Zimbabwe was not convinced in terms of processes and protocol and in line with international treaties that must be followed when you hand over a body, or you dig a grave, or you take the remains. Mm-hmm. And therefore, that is why some are not listed there.
And of course, at the same time, you know, this not only speaks, Sophie, of the processes that unfollow, but it really takes us back in time to these two countries, for example. Yes, we hear that, you know, remains are all over the world, but you think of Zambia, for example, and the role that it played in South Africa's liberation struggle, the support, the active support by that country for the African National Congress, for example.
Yes, you know, you have many people who died abroad or in exile in many countries in different regions, and that is why Today, the Deputy President was saying that it is almost 1,000 people that they have to attend to in terms of repatriating their remains. You'd recall that that would include even people who are not necessarily part of the ANC or the PAC or ZAPO or the June 16 group that went abroad, because many of them died in exile. It includes even certain historic perspective. You'd recall that the first repatriation was Sarah Baartman. You remember Sarah Baartman? And as South Africa is trying to bring home all what belongs to South Africa. So it will be different countries. You'd recall that Moses Kotane, who was laid to rest in Russia, was repatriated, and others. And I remember it took time for Russia to agree, because Russia was saying this is what binds us. And in line with international treaty, you can't just take the remains and repatriate them to another country. So and then you have countries such as Uganda. There are people in Uganda and many other countries. You talk about countries such as the West Africa, because many people went to exile in West Africa. Such countries such as Guinea-Conakry, Nigeria. So you'll have people, including Kenya and all of that. I think this is going to be part of that, because all these countries played an important role in assisting South Africa to be free, and it really gave refuge to freedom fighters. Maybe let's listen in.
Well, certainly, as you can see, it's an absolutely somber mood here at the Waterkloof Air Force Base. So as you can see, this is the first batch of the coffins to be taken into the hearse, and they'll be going straight to one military hospital. As you know, that it's still going to be a very rigorous process for the families. As you know, that the issues pertaining to the DNA, really just a verification to make sure that these are real remains that really belongs to the families, that they have claimed them. But also quite a very surreal moment for the families. As you know, that this is such a very important time for South Africa. As you know, that it's part of celebrating the lives and heroes and heroines who laid down their lives in honor of this country. So tonight here at one of South Africa's prominent Air Force bases here in Waterkloof, you have this occasion. So the repatriation of the freedom fighters remains from Zambia and Zimbabwe. It forms part of the Resistance and Liberation Heritage Route project. So it's all about commemorating, celebrating, but also promoting, preserving and providing a durable testament of South Africa's road to freedom. And as you know, Bongo Mfundo, that on Friday you're going to have a very big occasion. They call it a homecoming ceremony. It's going to be officiated by the head of state, South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa, where also the wall of names, the names of these heroes and heroines will be inscribed. But also something that is quite important to point out is that initially the numbers that they were aiming for 49 mortal remains, but eventually they were able to bring back here in South Africa 42 mortal remains. And you look at a number of eminent South Africans really who fought against apartheid, and this is quite very important in terms of making sure that South Africa is able to come to terms with its past. And So that's the first batch, and as you can see, it's a hive of activity. They're really leaving now the Air Force Base, going to a very important place as well, one military hospital here in the capital. But also in the main, so we do understand that now you're going to see now the next couple of cars as well coming in to take the next batch of mortal remains. So with that, back to you in studio.
All right, thank you very much, Kaya. Well, we're still joined by SABC International News editor Sophie Mokoena just to reflect on this specific and very significant movement. Sophie, I just want to take you back to the role played by Zimbabwe. You touched on the role played by Zambia, but the government of Zimbabwe took great interest in ensuring the independence of Namibia and that of South Africa, especially as chairman of the Frontline states. Just talk to us about the significant role they played.
Well, I think you know that, for example, the PAC had a very strong relationship with ZANU-PF. The ANC, on the other hand, had a very strong relationship with ZAPU. That is why some of the liberation songs, you realize that they are similar to what the songs that are being used by ZAPU. And therefore, there has been that relationship. But also, you look at countries such as Angola, they did support South Africa as part of this frontline war. And South Africa, not the regime, the apartheid regime, but I'm talking about the freedom fighters and liberation organizations, did assist those countries also to get their independence or to fight with the regime. And therefore, it was a powerful unity in the SADC region. And that is why the South African government decided that Freedom Park, because it tells a story of how South Africa was liberated, it must include the contribution by countries such as Cuba, such as Russia, such as your Tanzania, such as, you know, Namibia, Botswana, Lesotho. You know that many of the powerful leaders of South Africa even got education in Lesotho. Some of the remains of certain people who are very close to powerful people in the country are still in Lesotho. For example, the brother of the former president Thabo Mbeki, Jama, his remains are still in Lesotho. You have many people who are still in the line. You know that MPA is doing this job with diligence, and they have a unit called Tracing Department, where they are also looking at finding those people, even though some of them, they know where they are, but they are also taking information and working hard, and with forensic experts, sometimes international and local. That department today, where they are watching the work that they've done recently in Zimbabwe and in Zambia. So it is a huge project, and it started a long time ago.
And of course, we continue then to watch these developments as the Khayelihle Khumalo was taking us through what is taking place now at the Waterkloof Air Force Base. And we're still in studio with the international news editor Sophie Mokoena. And Sophie, listening even to the Defense Minister earlier on, she was talking about the fact that, you know, for example, these are different people who would have made different contributions in their own way to the liberation struggle, mentioning Florence Moposho, for example, someone that, you know, you think about 1957, serving in the Alexandra Bus Boycott Committee. And then you take a step back in history, just as you mentioned earlier on as well. You had Moses Kotane, you had J.B. Marks, and these are individuals whose families would have said, we would really hope at some point you bring them back to the country. Yes, they made a significant contribution, but for the families as well, this is a more personal moment.
Yes, I spoke to the daughter of the late Advocate Duma Nokwe, who was the Secretary General of the ANC, and he occupied that position when he was very, very young. talking about this moment, saying that much as at some point in time they had accepted that they will be there in those countries, because with a soldier you get laid to rest where you have fallen. But as time goes on, they appreciated the fact that there was an effort from this government through NPA, through the Department of Justice, through the Department of Home Affairs, through the Department of Social Development, through the Department of Defense, to ensure that this happens. As you pointed out with Kotani in Russia, I remember visiting the grave before they were exhumed. The Russians were saying, if you take them, you're cutting almost the relationship, because we cherish this moment of having them there. So indeed, you are correct. It is a very important moment for families. But these are families of people who are fighting for freedom, and they really appreciate what their loved ones did, and they often don't complain. They appreciate that this was something that they took upon themselves to do. They decided to free us all, and some of them wouldn't survive. And we are correct, it's not only soldiers, because in terms of the struggle, you had people who were assisting in education of the children of those who were in struggle, and also educating the very same people who were in struggle. You have people who were part of the health services, the nurses, the doctors, almost like when you see the defense force, how it's structured. It is a country within a country. So they also had different roles. It wasn't just only taking guns and fighting. So there were lots of things that were supposed to be done, and therefore you needed different expertise. That is why majority of the 1976 group, when they arrived in exile, O.R. Tambo and many others told them to go back to school to acquire qualifications, because the day the country is free, they will have to run the country. So you see them, some of them are still in the civil service, in the public service, some of them were there, and some have retired. So it was a serious operation outside the country as well.
Indeed, a very serious operation, and a very important moment again to allow us to engage with the past as we look to the future. Sophie, thank you very much for your insights as always this evening.